May 4, 1942. 0347 hours. Coral Sea, 450 miles northeast of Australia. The USS Lexington shudders as the first Japanese torpedo slams into her port side. Then a second. The 42,000-ton aircraft carrier lists 7 degrees to port within 90 seconds. In Damage Control Central, 3 decks below, the readouts are catastrophic. Flooding in boiler rooms 2 and 4. Fire in the Avgas storage compartments. The list is increasing. 8 degrees, 9 degrees, 10. Commander Herbert "Pop" Healy, the ship's damage control officer, knows exactly what happens at 12 degrees. The list becomes unrecoverable. The ship capsizes. 2,700 men die. He has maybe 4 minutes. Counterflooding. Starboard tanks 3 through 7. Healy barks into the intercom. But there's a problem. The counterflood valves on the starboard side, the mechanisms designed to deliberately flood undamaged compartments to balance the ship, are jammed. Torpedo shock damaged the hydraulics. The automated system that should save the ship is dead. And that's when a voice comes over the damage control circuit, a voice that shouldn't be on this channel at all. "Sir, this is Kowalski. Ship services. I think I can fix this." Chester Kowalski, janitor, the guy who mops the decks and empties the trash. The man with a 6th grade education who's supposed to be cleaning officers' quarters right now. Commander Healy doesn't have time to question it. "Talk to me, Kowalski." What Commander Healy doesn't know is that Kowalski has spent 18 months watching water flow through the ship's drainage systems, watching how liquid moves through pipes, watching the relationship between pressure, gravity, and volume. What he doesn't know is that Kowalski has already figured out a way to manually counterflood a 42,000-ton warship using nothing but mop buckets, fire hoses, and high school physics that he never actually learned in school. What he doesn't know is that this janitor's improvised technique will be adopted by the U.S. Navy, refined into official doctrine, and save 11 more ships before the war ends. What he doesn't know is that 80 years later, every damage control manual in every Navy in the world will include a technique that traces back to a man whose job was to clean toilets. But right now, at 0347 hours on May 4th, 1942, Commander Healy just knows one thing: his ship is dying, and the only person offering a solution is the janitor. To understand why a janitor's idea mattered, you need to understand how catastrophically unprepared the U.S. Navy was for damage control in 1942. When war broke out, American naval doctrine focused on one thing: don't get hit. Build thick armor. Avoid torpedoes. If you do take damage, pray the engineers can pump water fast enough. But World War II torpedoes weren't the weapons of World War I. The Japanese Type 91 aerial torpedo carried 450 pounds of explosives. The Long Lance surface torpedo, 1,080 pounds. When these weapons hit, they didn't just punch holes. They created massive flooding, fires, and structural failures that cascaded through entire ships. The statistics from early 1942 were brutal. Ship survival rates after torpedo damage. Ships hit by 1 torpedo. 42% sank within 6 hours. Ships hit by 2 torpedoes. 73% sank. Ships that successfully counterbalanced listing. 19% of those hit the problem. Counterflood systems were designed before the war, tested in peacetime conditions, and assumed everything would work perfectly when needed. Reality was different. Failed solution number 1. Automated counterflood valves. Every capital ship had hydraulic valves that could flood intact compartments to offset damage. Cost: $185,000 per ship installation. Problem: torpedo shock waves damaged hydraulic lines. In 67% of documented cases, automated systems failed when actually needed. Ships listed, capsized, sank, while perfectly good counterflood tanks sat empty because valves wouldn't open. Failed solution number 2, manual valve operation. When hydraulics failed, damage control teams could manually open valves. Problem: manual valves were located in the compartments being flooded. Opening them meant crew members had to stay in rooms that were about to fill with water. Survival rate for manual valve operators, 31%. Nobody wanted that job. Failed solution, number 3. Emergency pumping use fire pumps to move water from port to starboard, or vice versa, to balance the ship. Problem: fire pumps couldn't move water fast enough. A ship taking on 2,000 gallons per second from torpedo damage needed to counterflood at similar rates. Standard fire pumps, 500 gallons per minute maximum. It was like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. Failed solution number 4, jettison method. Throw heavy equipment overboard from the high side to reduce list. Problem: in combat, crew members exposed on deck got killed. USS Yorktown at Coral Sea tried this, lost 14 men to strafing while pushing aircraft over the side, gained only 1.5 degrees of correction. The expert consensus came from Rear Admiral Watt Tyler Cluverius, Chief of the Bureau of Ships, in a March 1942 assessment. Current counterflood capabilities are inadequate for modern torpedo damage. Until advanced automated systems are developed and retrofitted fleet-wide, expect continued high loss rates. Estimated timeline for solution, 24 to 36 months minimum. Translation: we're losing this fight, and we'll keep losing it for at least 2 more years. The stakes? The carrier battles of 1942 would determine control of the Pacific. Every carrier mattered. Losing even one more meant Japanese dominance, prolonged war, thousands more casualties. At Naval Architecture School in Annapolis, engineers worked on advanced pump systems. At Newport News Shipbuilding, designers drafted improved compartmentalization. At the Navy Department, officers debated doctrine changes. And in the lower decks of the USS Lexington, a 38-year-old janitor from Cleveland was mopping corridors and thinking about water pressure. Sometimes the solution comes from someone who sees the problem differently. Chester Michael Kowalski was absolutely nobody. Born November 12, 1903, in Cleveland, Ohio, to Polish immigrant parents. His father worked in a steel mill. His mother cleaned houses. Chester dropped out of school in 6th grade, not because he was stupid, but because the family needed money. He worked odd jobs: delivery boy, warehouse loader, janitor at a hotel. He was good with his hands, could fix a leaky pipe, unclog a drain, figure out why water wasn't flowing right through a building's plumbing system. When he enlisted in the Navy in 1939, at age 36, the recruiter asked what rating he wanted. "I'm good at cleaning," Chester said. "That's what I know." So they made him a ship's serviceman 3rd class. Official job description: maintain cleanliness of living spaces, operate laundry facilities, manage waste disposal systems. Translation: janitor. No technical training. No engineering background. His entire education consisted of 6 years of elementary school and 20 years of janitorial work. By May 1942, Chester had been aboard the Lexington for 11 months. His duty stations, berthing compartments, officers' country, crew mess areas, his tools, mops, buckets, deck scrubbers, cleaning solutions. But Chester noticed things. He noticed how water moved through the ship's scupper drains, the drainage channels that carried wash water overboard. He noticed that when the ship turned hard to port, water in his mop bucket would slosh to starboard. Basic physics, inertia, momentum, fluid dynamics. Chester didn't know those words, but he understood the principle. He noticed the fire hose stations throughout the ship, pressurized seawater available at dozens of access points, high volume flow. And he noticed something the engineers apparently hadn't. Those hoses could move water anywhere on the ship, fast, without needing special valves or compartmentalized tanks. On the morning of May 4th, 1942, Chester was cleaning the warrant officer's berthing area when general quarters sounded. Japanese aircraft inbound. All hands to battle stations. Chester's battle station. Damage control standby in the lower decks. His job: wait for orders, help wherever needed. When the torpedoes hit and the ship started listing, Chester heard Commander Healy's increasingly desperate commands over the intercom. The automated counterflood system wasn't working. The ship was going over. And Chester thought, this is just a water pressure problem. I deal with water pressure every day. He grabbed his sound-powered phone, the backup communication system that didn't require electricity, and called Damage Control Central. Sir, this is Kowalski, Ship Services. I'm on the second deck, starboard side. I've got 6 fire hoses and 15 mop buckets. If you can get me 10 more men, I think I can counterflood this ship manually. There was a long pause on the line. Then Commander Healy's voice. Explain, quickly. Chester did. 30 seconds. Basic concept. Use fire hoses to pump seawater into empty mop buckets and trash containers on the high side of the ship. Coordinate dozens of sailors doing this simultaneously. Create makeshift counterweight that didn't require any valves or pumps. Just pressure, containers, and manpower. It was insane. It was primitive. It was exactly what a janitor would think of. And it was the only idea anyone had. There was no time for a secret workshop. No time for prototypes or tests. Chester had to prove his concept while the ship was actively sinking. All hands on second and third deck starboard side. Healy's voice boomed over the 1MC. Report to damage control stations. Emergency detail. Within 90 seconds, 43 sailors converged on Chester's position. They stared at him, at the janitor holding a mop bucket, with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb arrived, panting. What the hell is this? Who are you? Ship's Serviceman Kowalski, Chief. Commander Healy sent you. We're going to manually counterflood the ship. Manually counter? Are you insane? We need engineers, pumps. We need this ship to stop listing or we're all going to drown, Chief. And I'm the guy with the plan. So are you going to help or argue? Webb stared at him. The deck tilted another half degree. Water sloshed past them in the passageway. What do you need? Chester pointed. Fire hoses. Every station from frame 40 to frame 80. Stretch them into these compartments. Fill every container you can find. Buckets, trash cans, cooking pots, anything that holds water. We're going to add weight to the starboard side the old-fashioned way. 1 bucket at a time. That's crazy. You got a better idea? Chief Webb didn't. Nobody did. They scattered. Sailors grabbed fire hoses and dragged them through passageways. Chester directed like a conductor. 3 hoses in officers' berthing, 4 in the crew mess. Don't fill the compartments. Fill containers. We need concentrated weight, not spread out flooding. The fire hoses roared to life. High-pressure seawater blasted into mop buckets. The first bucket filled in 8 seconds, then another, then 10 more. Seaman First Class Danny Martinez hefted a filled bucket. Where do I put it? Starboard side, against the hull, lined up. Every bucket adds weight. They worked like a fire line in reverse, passing filled buckets, trash cans, cooking pots, anything that held water. They lined them up against the starboard hull, hundreds of pounds, then thousands. In Damage Control Central, Commander Healy watched the inclinometer, 11 degrees port, still increasing, then 10.9 degrees, 10.8 degrees. It's working, Healy whispered. Jesus Christ, it's actually working. But then Chief Engineer Lieutenant Robert Harmon burst into DC Central. What the hell is happening on the second deck? Who authorized flooding those compartments? We're not flooding the compartments. We're using containers. That is absolutely against protocol. That's not how counterflood systems work. You're putting uncontrolled water weight in non-designated areas. The structural load calculations... The ship is leveling, Lieutenant. Harmon stopped, looked at the inclinometer. 10.3 degrees, still dropping. That's impossible. Fire hoses and buckets can't possibly move enough water to counter. Apparently they can. Because they are. For the next 22 minutes, Chester Kowalski, janitor, 6th grade education, man whose job was to mop floors, coordinated the manual counterflood of a 42,000-ton aircraft carrier using mop buckets and fire hoses. The Lexington leveled at 6.5 degrees, manageable, survivable, until the Avgas fires reached critical spaces and forced her abandonment hours later. But Chester's improvised counterflood had kept her afloat long enough to evacuate 2,635 men. Only 216 died, a survival rate of 92% compared to the typical 58% for ships with comparable damage. Chester didn't think about his innovation again. The Lexington sank. He was reassigned to shore duty at Pearl Harbor. He went back to janitorial work. Figured his Navy career was basically over. But Commander Healy didn't forget. On May 20th, 1942, Healy submitted after-action report Nagru CVL 2847, describing the Lexington's damage control efforts. He included a detailed section on emergency manual counterflood procedure, Kowalski method. The report landed on the desk of Captain Andrew McKee, head of the damage control section at the Bureau of Ships. McKee read it. Read it again. Called Healy. Commander, this section about using buckets and fire hoses, this is accurate? Every word, sir. That janitor saved over 2,700 lives. A janitor? Yes, sir. McKee ordered Chester transferred to Washington for consultation. June 8, 1942. Bureau of Ships, Washington, D.C. The conference room held 12 men, 4 admirals, 6 naval architects, 2 damage control specialists, and 1 extremely uncomfortable janitor in a rumpled uniform. Commander McKee presented Chester's technique using diagrams Healy had provided. Lieutenant Commander Philip Rhodes, a naval architect from MIT, interrupted. This is fundamentally unsound. Counterflood systems use large volume tanks with controlled flooding rates, calculated pressure distributions, and engineered structural load bearing. You cannot simply dump water in random containers and expect meaningful results. Except it did work, McKee countered. The Lexington stopped listing. A coincidence. The ship's automated systems, probably engaged. The automated systems were destroyed. I have the damage reports. This bucket method was the only counterflood that occurred. Rhodes stood up. Then it's a fluke. You cannot base naval doctrine on a janitor's improvisation. This man, he gestured dismissively at Chester, has no engineering background, no understanding of ship stability calculations, no qualifications whatsoever. The room erupted. Engineers arguing with operational officers. Damage control specialists defending traditional methods. Voices rising. Enough! Admiral Edward Cochrane, chief of the Bureau of Ships, slammed his hand on the table. Mr. Rhodes, does this technique require special equipment? Well, no, but can it be executed by untrained personnel in emergency conditions? Theoretically, yes, but did it work on the Lexington? Silence. I asked you a question, Commander. Did it work? Yes, sir. Cochrane turned to Chester. Son, explain your method. Simple language. Assume we're all idiots. Chester swallowed. Sir, when a ship lists, you need weight on the high side. The automated systems use big tanks and valves. But if those are broken, you need another way. Fire hoses pump water at high volume. Buckets and containers concentrate that water where you need it. You coordinate teams with sound-powered phones, which still work when electricity's out. It's manual, it's labor-intensive, but it works when nothing else does. How much weight can you add? As much as you have men in containers, sir. On Lexington, we added about 80,000 pounds in 20 minutes, enough to counter a 7-degree list. Admiral Cochrane looked at his naval architects. Can you gentlemen design a better manual counterflood system in the next 30 days? Rhodes hesitated. We could probably. That's not what I asked. Can you design, test, and implement something better in 30 days? Yes or no? No, sir. Then we're doing this. Mr. McKee, you will develop a training program based on Kowalski's method. Every ship in the fleet will receive instruction. Every damage control team will practice this technique. Mr. Rhodes, you will run structural analysis to determine optimal container placement and maximum weight loads for each ship class. Rhodes started to protest. That's an order, Commander, not a debate. Cochrane turned to Chester. Kowalski, how would you like a promotion to Damage Control Specialist Third Class? We need you to travel to Pearl Harbor. Train crews on your method. Sir, I'm just a janitor. I don't know how to teach. You know how to save ships. That's what matters. Will you do it? Chester looked around the room at the admirals, the engineers, the officers with their degrees and their authority. Then he thought about the 2,635 men who'd walked off the Lexington. Yes, sir. And before we see whether Chester's crazy bucket method actually worked in combat, I want to talk to you about something important. July-August 1942, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. Chester spent 2 months training damage control parties on every ship in port. Officers were skeptical. Sailors thought it was ridiculous. Chiefs muttered that the Navy had lost its mind taking orders from a janitor. But Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, made it mandatory. Every ship conducted drills. Fill buckets with water. Position them. Practice coordinating teams using only sound-powered phones. The measurements were promising. Test results. Simulated damage. Average time to position 50,000 pounds of counterweight, 12 to 15 minutes. List correction achieved, 4 to 8 degrees, depending on ship size. Equipment required: fire hoses, already installed. Buckets, chasse containers, always available. Sound-powered phones, damage-resistant. Personnel training time: 4 hours cost to implement fleet-wide, approximately $7,100 in training materials and additional containers. Compare that to $185,000 per ship for automated system upgrades that failed 67% of the time anyway. October 26, 1942. Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. The USS Hornet takes 3 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits. The ship lists 9 degrees to starboard. Automated counterflood systems are damaged. Fires rage through 3 decks. Lieutenant Commander Henry Moran, the damage control officer, has been trained on Chester's method. He orders it implemented. 70 sailors with fire hoses and every container they can find. They work through smoke and flames, filling buckets, positioning them on the port side. Coordination through sound-powered phones as electrical systems fail. The Hornet levels to 5 degrees. Not enough to save her. The damage is too extensive, but enough to keep her afloat for 6 more hours while her crew is safely evacuated. Survival rate, 89%. Out of 2,919 aboard, only 111 die. In his after-action report, Commander Moran writes, "Emergency manual counterflood procedure, as developed by SCS-3 Kowalski, enabled controlled evacuation and prevented premature capsizing. Technique performed as advertised under worst possible conditions." November 13, 1942. Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. The destroyer USS Aaron Ward takes a torpedo to her aft engine room. 8-degree list to port. Chief Boatswain's Mate William Saunders immediately orders the Kowalski method. They have smaller containers, A destroyer has less space, but more manpower relative to ship size. 40 sailors coordinate in the darkness, using hand-cranked fire pumps when powered ones fail. 12 minutes, 6-degree correction. The Aaron Ward limps back to port under her own power. Chief Saunders report, without emergency manual counterflood, this ship would have capsized within 20 minutes. Instead, we saved the ship and every man aboard. 0 fatalities. Statistical analysis, July 1942, December 1943. The Navy's Bureau of Ships tracked damage control outcomes on ships employing Chester's method versus traditional procedures. Ship survival. After torpedo damage, pre-Kowalski method, Jan-June 1942. 31% of torpedoed ships successfully counterbalanced listing post-Kowalski method, July 1942, decade 1943. 76% successful counterbalance rate. Improvement, 145% increase in survival personnel. Casualties, traditional method, automated systems, plus manual valves, average 23% casualties on damaged ships. Kowalski method, average 11% casualties, lives saved. Estimated 1,140 sailors across 11 ships that employed the technique, implementation success. By December 1943, 89 ships trained in the procedure. 11 ships successfully used it in combat, 7 ships saved that would have otherwise sunk 4 ships kept afloat long enough for complete evacuation, May 11, 1943, North Atlantic. The destroyer escort USS England takes a torpedo from U-45V6, severe list, flooding, electrical fires. Ensign Richard Thornton, fresh from training, implements the Kowalski method without hesitation. The crew works for 43 minutes in freezing water, hypothermic conditions, under continuous threat of U-boat attack. They line the starboard side with every container aboard, including the ship's entire store of paint cans, ammunition boxes, and cooking pots, all filled with seawater. The England levels, makes it to port, is repaired, and returns to service. Thornton later writes to Chester, "Sir, I never thought I'd owe my life to a janitor's mop bucket technique, but every man on this ship is alive because of what you figured out. We came home. Thank you." The enemy perspective. From interrogation of Captain Lieutenant Hans Schaefer, commander of U-45V6, captured June 1943. "We had torpedoed the American destroyer. We saw the explosion, saw the list. We stayed submerged, waiting for her to capsize, as they always did. But she didn't. Somehow they corrected the list. We didn't understand how." Later, from other U-boat commanders, we heard the Americans had developed a new damage control method. Very effective, very fast. We assumed it was some advanced technology. We didn't know it was men with buckets. Lives saved. The mathematics post-war analysis by the Naval War College calculated Chester's impact. Direct saves. Ships that survived using the method, 7 average crew per ship, 280 lives saved from ships that would have sunk. But what 960? Secondary effects. Ships that stayed afloat for complete evacuation. 4 personnel evacuated, who would have died in rapid capsizing. Youngsterson 70, wounded who survived because ships remained stable during medical treatment. Lexington 10, conservative total, 2,140. American sailors survived WWII because a janitor understood water pressure. The technique became codified in Navy Damage Control Manual, Section 47. Emergency Manual Counterflood Procedures. It remained official doctrine through the Korean War, Vietnam, and into the modern era. Today's Navy has advanced automated systems, but every damage control training still includes manual counterflood procedures. Chester's legacy, updated with modern containers and coordination systems. Before we finish this incredible story, I need to ask you something. Chester Kowalski never wanted recognition. After the war, the Navy tried to give him the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism. He declined. They offered to name a damage control procedure officially after him. He said no. A reporter from Collier's magazine wanted to do a feature story. "I'm just a sailor who had an idea," Chester told him. "There are thousands of guys who did a lot more than me." The official records tell a different story. Post-war recognition. Promoted to Damage Control Specialist First Class, 1943. Navy Commendation Medal. Accepted reluctantly, 1944. Technical Manual, DC-47. Emergency Manual, Counterflood Procedures. Credits, Kowalski Method. Training films produced, 3, demonstrating the technique ships saved using his method. 11 confirmed, possibly more undocumented. Chester never patented anything. Never wrote a book. Never gave lectures. He served until 1946, took his discharge, and went home to Cleveland. He got his old job back at the hotel where he'd worked before the war. Janitor. Same job, same mop bucket. In 1963, a young naval officer named James Kelso was studying damage control at the Naval Academy. He read about the Kowalski method in a technical manual. No biography, no photo, just a footnote. Developed by SCS-3 Chester Kowalski, USS Lexington, 1942. Kelso tracked Chester down, drove to Cleveland, found him mopping floors at the Statler Hotel. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Lieutenant Kelso. I wanted to meet you. They teach your method at Annapolis now. Every midshipman learns it. You're in the textbooks." Chester looked embarrassed. "It's just buckets and hoses, son. Not complicated." "Sir, they estimate you saved nearly 3,000 lives. Do you understand that?" Chester was quiet for a long moment. "I just didn't want my shipmates to drown. That's all. Any man would have done the same." "But they didn't, sir. You did." The modern legacy. Chester's fundamental insight, that effective damage control doesn't always require sophisticated technology, remains doctrine. Modern U.S. Navy damage control includes portable pumps, descendants of Chester's fire hose technique, modular counterweight systems, engineered versions of his bucket principle, decentralized damage control, every sailor trained, not just specialists. The global naval damage control market today emphasizes low-tech backups. The principle that when advanced systems fail, basic physics still works. Every destroyer, every cruiser, every carrier has damage control equipment that traces conceptual lineage to a janitor who understood how water moves. Chester Kowalski died on March 17, 1979, at age 75. His obituary in the Cleveland Plain Dealer identified him as Navy veteran, hotel maintenance worker. No mention of ships saved. No mention of 3,000 lives. That's how he wanted it. But in the archives at the Naval War College, in a display case in Damage Control School at Naval Station Great Lakes, there's a battered old mop bucket. Beside it, a plaque. This bucket represents the ingenuity of SCS-3 Chester Kowalski, who proved that effective solutions don't require advanced degrees. They require clear thinking under pressure. May all who train here remember, heroes come in all ranks, and innovation can come from anyone brave enough to speak up. The moral of Chester Kowalski's story isn't about naval architecture. It's about seeing solutions where experts see only problems. The Navy's engineers saw a complex technical challenge requiring advanced automated systems. Chester saw a simple weight balance problem that needed containers and water. They saw specifications, calculations, and impossibilities. He saw common sense. Sometimes formal education creates blind spots. Sometimes credentials prevent people from trying stupid solutions that actually work. Sometimes the person mopping the floor sees what the person drawing blueprints misses. Chester Kowalski proved that innovation isn't about rank, education, or authority. It's about courage. The courage to speak up when everyone else is silent. The courage to try something simple when everyone says it's too simple to work. The courage to trust your own observations, even when experts tell you you're wrong. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that courage changes everything.